Hello and welcome to this first tutorial where I'll go over the 5 basic steps you should consider doing to every photo you call up within Photoshop. Now this picture is available as a download from the course. Click on the link beneath this video where you can get the other 24 hours of content plus the PDF file and everything like that. But for now, let's carry on with this picture. Okay, so the 5 steps we should consider doing to every picture are: number 1, rotate and crop your picture. Number 2, get the dark and light values sorted out. Step 3, get the color balance or the white balance sorted out. Step number 4, deal with any digital noise issues and sharpen up your picture. And step 5, deal with any blemishes in the picture. This 5-step process is fundamental when it comes to developing your photos. Can I say from the outset, I am not expecting you to pick up everything I'm talking about just from this initial video. Right now, it's just important that you get a grip on the actual process itself, so let's get started. Okay, so very first steps. This is something I want you to get into the habit of doing with all your pictures. Come over to the side of your screen at the bottom right, and you'll see this panel here called Layers. I want you to come down to this bit which says Background, and you can see a little, it's called a thumbnail. It's a miniature image of everything which is on that layer. You can see a bit of sea, maybe you see a tiny little boat there. This is the background layer, and every photo you bring in from your camera will have all the tiny little squares called pixels that make up your image stored on that layer. If you want to know what those pixels look like, come on, I'll come to this bit of the boat and I'll zoom in, zoom to about there. You see that? Lots of tiny little squares that make up your image. Those are called pixels, and they're all stored on a layer called background. Now here's a keyboard command for you. Control on a PC, Command on a Mac, hold that keyboard button down and then press 0 at the same time, and you zoom out so that the picture fits on your screen. And what we'll do is come back to our layers panel and we will right click on that layer and we are going to duplicate our layer. You get a little dialog box saying, well, what do you want to call it? We are going to call this base, and hit enter or click on my OK button. And now we have 2 layers, one called background and one called base, which apart from the name is exactly the same as our background layer. And if we make any changes to that base layer and then we decide, well, actually we got it wrong, you've always got the background layer there acting as a backup. So you can duplicate it again and start again if you need to. This is a secure way of working. The next thing, well, what's the first step? Rotate and crop. So we come to our crop tool and click on it. And you can see I get this box surrounding my picture. And if I come to the edge of the box, you can see I have these little markers just on the end. And if I move that around, you can see I have a box that gets bigger or smaller, with some lines going 1/3 of the way along from left to right and 1/3 of the way along up and down. I don't like the ratio of that box. I want a wider box. So I will come up to the top left to my options bar and I'll choose a ratio of 16:9 and select it, and you can see my box gets wider. 16:9 is a very popular ratio for landscapes, and this is a landscape photo, so I will drag the corners of my box around like this to get the kind of picture I want. But also at the same time, I notice that my picture is a little bit lopsided. If you look at those buildings, they look like they're leaning over to the left slightly. You don't really notice it unless you're looking for it. And if you want to develop photos, you have to learn to look for things that other people might not notice, but you end up with something called an uncertainty fail. We will talk more about that. So what I will do is I'll come up to this little tool at the top called Straighten. I'll find one of these tall buildings and I will drag out a line like this, try and match it up with the angle of the building, and as soon as I let go, the whole picture tilts around so that the lines of those buildings are a little bit straighter. From here, if I drag around, I can position the picture where I want it to go, and I can give a quick tweak of this crop box like this. And I think I will lose a little bit so that those people in the foreground lie a little bit more on those rule of third lines. I will explain more about that as we go along. That's more or less where I want it, so I will press enter. Okay, that is step 1. The next thing I want to do is to get the dark and light sorted out, because that is looking a little bit hazy. The colours are looking a bit washed out. I know those colours can look stronger, and that will happen once we get the dark and light sorted out. I will press Ctrl or Command plus 0 so I can see all of my picture in as large a size as possible. Now there are a number of different ways of altering the dark and light. I'll show you one way. Come up to this tab here which says Adjustments and click on it. I have a series of adjustment layers. And here they are, the various different adjustment layers. I will click on something called Curves. Yes, I know it looks complicated. You will be learning about them. Once you do, you will be glad you did, because I can adjust my curve to alter the look of my picture. Can you see how the picture is getting darker there? But also, I can alter my curve so that the light stay light, like this. That's actually a little bit too light in the lighter area, so I can pull it down to make things a bit less light there, and maybe take this point here and pull that down. This is one way of altering the dark and light in your picture, and it doesn't permanently alter your picture. You can come back in at any time and readjust this to where you want it. Or I may decide, well, you know what, I'll try another way. I will come and I will select this little icon here and then come down to my trash can icon and get rid of my layer. I get a warning message. Do you want to delete the layer curves one? Yes, I do. Thank you very much. Because here's another way. I can come to my base layer. I can right click on it and I can convert it to a smart object. You will be learning about smart objects and how incredibly useful they are. But now I'm going to come to the top of my screen to where it says Filter. And then I'm going to come down to this thing, Camera Raw Filter. I get a little subprogram called the Camera Raw Filter, which has a series of sliders on the right hand side. Now I did say this picture was hazy, didn't I? Well, look at this. I have a slider called Dehaze. Let's slide that around and see what happens. Look at that. Can you see how those dusky, washed out bright colours are suddenly getting so much more vibrant? Now the highlights of this picture are looking a bit too bright, so I have a slider here called Highlights. I can pull those down to try and just tame some of those blown out white areas a little bit. Not too much, because this is a very sun-kissed beach and I want to get that idea across. Also, I like some of the texture of the rocks, so I've got a texture slider, so I can maybe slide that up a little bit. I'll make it extreme. Can you see how the texture of the rocks and the sea is suddenly getting a lot sharper? That might be a little bit too much for my taste, so I'll knock it back a bit like this. So you can see how I can alter the dark and light of this picture in many different ways. Now the next thing, the white balance or the color balance. Well, look at this. We have a couple of sliders here for temperature and tint. And if I move the temperature around, I can make the entire picture look bluer and cooler, which I don't really want. Come on, it's a warm summer's day. Why cool it down? Instead, maybe I can move it more towards yellow. I can make it effectively, I can change the time of day with this, or what time of year this picture appears to be taken. If I do that, I move, say, the tint a little bit, I'm starting to get something of an evening glow feel to this picture. And now that I've done that, maybe I might decide that I want a little bit more dehaze working there. So I've done step 2, the dark and light. I've also looked at step 3, getting the white balance sorted out. Now you've seen me move a couple of sliders here, but on this course you're going to see some much more precise ways of doing that. And so what's my next step? Sorting out the noise of the picture and also dealing with the sharpness of the picture. Well, as it happens, you can do that within the main interface of Photoshop, but you also have a detail tab here. And look at this, sharpening and noise reduction. Sharpening and noise reduction are two things which work together. Or to put it another way, sometimes they fight each other, because noise reduction tries to deal with the digital noise you sometimes get in the shadow areas of digital photographs, and sometimes when that photo is taken in a very dim light. Now this was taken on a bright summer's day, so I don't think there would be much of a noise problem here. And that actually is a good point. Just because there are 5 steps I want you to consider doing to a photo, it doesn't mean you have to do those steps. All you need to do is just think about whether you need to or not. As for sharpening, yes, I think this does need sharpening. Now we have some default settings here. I will increase the amount. It doesn't have to be by much. Sometimes people think when they're doing stuff like this that unless you can see what you're doing clearly on screen, you're not making a difference. You are making a difference, but it is subtle, and that sharpening I've just applied will be way too much. We will be talking much more about this in the videos that are coming up. So OK, I will come down and I will click on OK. Did you see the difference there? Look, I'll make the base layer invisible for a second by clicking on this little eye icon. That's what we had before. That's what we've got now. So step 5, deal with any blemishes. In order to do this, I'm going to come down to my layers panel again, and you see this icon here, it's to create a new layer. And if I click on that, what I've just created is a completely empty layer. It's transparent. It's not having any effect on this photo, but it is going to be useful. And because I want us to get into good habits right from the start, I'm going to double click the name layer 1 and I'm going to rename this to Blemishes. Now there are plenty of different ways to remove blemishes from your photo. Here's one of the simplest ones. If I come to this icon and I click and I hold on the left hand side, I have a whole load of healing brush tools here. I'm going to come to one of the easiest ones, the Spot Healing Brush Tool. There. And I'm going to make sure in my top options bar that this little check button is selected. Sample all layers. What that is going to do is take all the pixels from all of my different layers, and then Photoshop is going to try and automatically place those pixels to cover up bits of this picture that I don't want. So if I come down, well look, let's take a look at this boat. I like the look of the boat, but I don't like this, what is it, a polystyrene ball? It doesn't look nice. So I'm going to make my brush size a little bit bigger. You will see how to do all of this stuff, and I'm going to paint over it like this. Then I'm going to let go, and oh, look at that, it disappeared by magic. And while I'm here, let's take a look at a few other things. I don't like this little bit here that I'm circling now. I'll make my brush size a little bit smaller, so I just cover that area. Click, and it goes. What about this orange buoy at the side of my picture? I don't like that, so there you go. Who needs reality? You've got Photoshop. And on this course, when we start to talk about how to alter the shape of people's faces and take away spots and smooth skin, you will see that with Photoshop, reality and photos, they no longer necessarily go together. But in the meantime, that was a very simple way of removing those blemishes. They are still there, but I took various bits of C and painted them onto the blemish layer. And if I make the blemish layer invisible for a second, there are the things I appear to remove. And if I make my blemish layer visible again, hey presto, they are gone. This is something called non-destructive image editing, and is possibly the cornerstone of every modern image editing program. Okay, I'm going to come up to my menus at the top, and I'm going to come to Window, History. And at the side of my screen, I get a record of everything that I've done to my picture. Now I can click on any one of these little descriptions and step backwards to the point I made that change. So I will come right the way back to Open. That was our original file, and that is what we've ended up with. Okay, that was a quick overview of the 5-step editing process. There is a lot more to editing photos than this though. Things like selections, color grading, using smart objects, using the Adobe Camera Raw filter. But all of this stuff is covered on the 24-hour course, which I'm very pleased to say at the moment has one of the highest ratings for any Photoshop course on Udemy, along with all the photos you see available as downloads so you can follow along, plus a PDF document which gives you all the notes for the course, so you don't have to make your own notes. So click on the link below, enroll on the course, and if you'd like to hit the subscribe button on this channel as well, I'll be posting more videos so you can learn more about Photoshop in the future. I'll speak to you soon.